What's up, Newb University? Are you interested in becoming a firefighter or first respondent? Well, stay tuned because my next guest has a lot of information that might help you get along the way. What's up, Newb University? All right, we got a very special guest today. We have one of those people that are very important to our everyday lives. They're kind of overlooked, but they're very important here in our society. We have Mr. Chris Moon. How are you doing, sir?
Doing well. Nice to be here, man.
Yeah, good to have you. Thank you for coming along. Now, for those of you guys that don't know, Mr. Chris plays a very important role here in our society. Can you tell us what is it that you do?
So I am a firefighter paramedic with a city here in Houston.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't get any more heroic than that. So let's talk a little bit about how you got started, right? So what was it that made you want to go into this field?
So I kind of fell into it, actually. I was working a kind of a labor job. I was a fabricator for a shop, and one of my coworkers was a captain at one of the local volunteer departments, and he would bother me relentlessly about coming and joining, or at least trying it out a little bit. So one day I gave in. I was like, fine, just shut up, you know. And I went for a ride along with him, and we made a couple really cool calls. One was where they had to cut a person out of a car, and another, they actually made a house fire later that night.
Wow.
And after that, I was like, oh, this is really cool. I want to do this.
Yeah, you were hooked.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. So once you went on that ride along, what was the next step for you? You made the choice. I was like, this is for me. What was the next step for you?
So after that, I had like I said, the volunteer department that services the area that I lived in at the time. Basically he said, here's the day that you come up and just tell them that you want to be a fireman. So, well, okay. So I got there, told them, and they were like, fill this out, and there it is.
And it's all history from there, huh?
Right.
That's good. So, at the time as you were doing this, and was it, were you kind of nervous about it, or were you always kind of comfortable with the thought that, hey, this is what I'm going to be doing?
No, I was nervous at first. Like, it's obviously out of the comfort zone for most people. So, yeah, it was kind of a daunting task to take on, but you kind of sink into it. It becomes a routine, and, becomes fun after that, yeah.
Right, yeah. So once you did that, right, so you got comfortable with the idea, let's take us through the process of what it's like, right? Because part of the thing here is we know that there's people that are going to be interested in the topic and they want to go, hey, this sounds like something I'm going to want to get into. So take us through the process, right? So you went in for the ride along, and you went in to kind of go see what it was all about, and you signed up. So what is the first step for anybody out there that's looking to get in? What do you say to that?
So I would say first step is to go visit your local volunteer fire department and see if it's something that you would be into. Like, it seems really cool, and you get to ride on the fire truck, things like that. But there's a lot of things that go into it on the inside. Training that you have to do, money that you have to put up, and then the things that you come across during your calls. So you need to make sure that you're ready for that type of stuff.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, that's solid advice. And one thing you touched on that I want to kind of put a pin on is, so you mentioned, make sure it's right for you. What kind of personality traits do you think would be somebody should have that they want to get into it? What's something that you say, hey, this is the type of person that needs to come apply for this?
Somebody with a service attitude, somebody that, has the desire to help people. Because if you're just in it for yourself, for what we call T-shirt, you're not going to last long. And we're going to find you pretty quick, and it's not going to work out too well.
Yeah, yeah. Plus, I mean, when you're in this type of job, I mean, you have people's lives at your hand, and you got to make sure that you do fit in and you have that in you. So I'm glad you mentioned that. So let's kind of like talk through the process. So you went to now we're into getting into the school, right? What are the next steps after that?
So if you go into the volunteer fire service, traditionally they provide all the training and the gear, and you'll do the training there at their facility for however long they require, and you'll gain these certifications, particularly through the volunteer services. It's governed through the State Firemen's and Fire Marshals Association, and so they'll a lot of times get you to what's called Firefighter 1, and it's on you to gain further training after that. The paid fire service is governed by the Texas Commission on Fire Protection, and they'll certify you after Firefighter 2 or after you go to a fire academy, a standalone fire academy. You have to also, in the paid service, you have to also be certified as an EMT at a minimum, and so that's on you to go and get that training as well.
Nice. So what's the toughest part for you at that point? What do you think is the biggest challenge when you're at that stage of your career development? What do you think is the toughest?
Oh man, getting into the fire academy is physical fitness is the biggest thing. You have no idea how hard it is. You think but it's way beyond.
Right. What kind of demands? So what are we talking about when we say physical? Like what are we carrying things? Like what are some of the activities that you guys would be doing at that point?
So obviously we're in Texas and it's summer.
Oh my God.
And we're wearing 60 pounds worth of gear.
Wow.
That you have to be able to move through a building with basically zero visibility, and carrying with you whatever tools you bring and the hose line. And then if you happen to upon a victim, then you have to drag that person out as well. So 60 pounds of gear. If you're taking the irons, which we refer to that as a tool called a Halligan bar, and a flat-headed axe. And then your hose line, your irons are probably 30 pounds, and your hose line is, depending on whether it's charged or not, has water in it or not, is very heavy.
Wow. That sounds like a recipe for overheating really quick.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm sure a lot of people you go through heat exhaustion is just going through the training process. I mean, that sounds very it's almost like a hazing process, but it's what you guys would come across on a day-to-day basis, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so how many people would you say get to that stage? And you don't have to have the exact numbers, but how many did you through your class, did you see a lot of people drop out at that point?
Yeah. So classes typically, start with, let's say, 40, and they'll sometimes graduate less than 20 of those.
So half. Wow, that really puts it makes it clear who's cut to these and who's not. Now that you're a fireman, what does that mean for you as far as physical activity? How much effort do you have to to stay up to you got to make sure you can do some of the stuff. How much of that do you spend nowadays working on your fitness?
Every single day.
Every single day. Wow.
Every single day. I have a really kind of rigorous physical fitness regimen that I follow while I'm off duty. While I'm on duty, it's kind of more laxed. We do have workout facilities that we can utilize at work. But if we do, it's typically something light, light weights or a light jog on the treadmill or something like that. But everybody's different with what they want to do. Some guys do full-blown workouts for 2 hours while they're at work. If they get interrupted, they get interrupted. But other people like me, I like to do my stuff on my off days.
That's good. So you're doing a little bit of resistance and cardio. Which one do you say would be the most important for what you do?
So I do CrossFit.
Oh, that's awesome.
And it translates really well into what we do. Because you could be asked to do any number of tasks during the course of your day. So training for that type of, functional fitness is pretty key. And then also I do, light workouts, and then I train martial arts as well.
Yeah, that's good. So, as the audience should know by now, I'm a huge martial artist. Been doing it for. We actually met. Well, no, we met at school, but we went to the same martial arts school. Does any of that actually help you throughout the process? Because I can imagine an instance where, let's say, for example, you're trying to like help somebody out, and then they kind of, they don't know where they're at, and then they might get a little kind of crazy on you. Would you say that's something that's going to be helpful to kind of prepare you for that?
Absolutely. Several occasions I've had to restrain people in various states of clothing as well. So that adds a little bit to it.
Right. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, it's good to hear, because when you mentioned, as I was kind of prepping this, I noticed that you were working on jiu-jitsu, and I was like, well, that plays really well into what you do, because you never know what state of panic that person's going to be on, much like lifeguards, right? Because they when they go in to save somebody, they're gonna that person's freaking out, they're gonna crawl, trying to crawl over. So that's good. I'm glad you mentioned that. That's something that I never thought about, but that's good we talked about that.
Oh yeah.
So let's kind of go back now. So we're at the academy, we're going through the training. What's the next step once we pass that point?
So once you're at past the fire academy, then you have to go and get your EMS certification, which in Texas there's 3 levels: EMT basic, EMT intermediate, which is now called advanced EMT, and then paramedic. You have to be at least an EMT basic to be TCFP certified, and that school's typically about a semester, and it gives you kind of a basic understanding of how the body works and basic like first aid type things. EMT intermediate, they get a little more advanced, kind of more into the body processes, and a little bit more advanced skills, and some drug administration, things like IVs and intubations where you put the tube down their throat. And then paramedics are the highest level. They can you get really, really in depth in how the body works, pathophys, disease processes, inflammatory response, all that really deep knowledge, and they can also interpret what's called a 12-lead EKG, which is reading the electrical impulses in your heart, as well as administer narcotics and cardiac medications. So
wow. So you guys become very well rounded. I mean, aside from just being able to suppress fire, but you are also expected to know basically how to save someone's life. That's awesome. Yeah. So out of the two, we mentioned fire suppression and kind of EMT. How much of that do you do on a day to day? What's kind of the breakdown of what you do predominantly?
So about 80% of our calls are EMS related. So about 20% of what we do is fire. So EMS is really, really important, and they stress it a lot. So it's really important to be on top of your game when it comes to that type of stuff.
Yeah, that's good. That's good to hear that, at least there's not that many fires going on here. Well, at least you guys are not in California, because I'm sure those guys have their hands full out there. Yeah. So let's move on now. So we got through the fire school, you're EMT certified. What's the next step?
So you've got your certification, then it's time to start applying for jobs. And the TCFP typically helps with that. They have a page on their website that tells you who's hiring and what they're hiring for. And then you'll follow their application processes. And once you're done with that, you have typically like a 4 to 5 step process in order to get hired. The first is a written exam, just basic everyday skills, math comprehension, reading comprehension, problem solving, things like that. And a what we call a PPT, or a physical abilities test. And it's different for a bunch of for every department. They'll set theirs up differently, but it's basically a task-based physical fitness assessment. So you'll run through the gamut of what type of task you're going to be running into, pulling a hose, extricating a victim, going up and down stairs. Typically, there's a run or something that tires you out beforehand. And a lot of times you're wearing gear doing this, so they can see where you stand, basically. And that knocks out a lot of people. So just another point on being physically ready for the job. After that, if you pass that, you'll typically go to a panel interview, which you'll interview in front of any number of what we call line personnel or guys on the floor that you're going to be working with, and they'll ask you the typical interview questions. And then if you pass that, you'll go to a chief's interview. You'll interview with the fire chief themselves, and after that is an offer of employment, and then they'll do a physical, drug test, all that good stuff. And some departments actually do a polygraph, which mine doesn't, so I couldn't comment on to what they ask you there, but it's just another thing you have to be ready for.
Good. And so what can they really expect on their first day?
Get ready. So the rookie, always bring breakfast and make it something better than donuts and kolaches. Bring ice cream and shake everybody's hand when you get to the station. Get there at least an hour early. And then you're going to be run through basically the gauntlet. So you're going to check off the trucks. You're going to be washing the trucks. You're going to be restocking the trucks. You're going to be cooking breakfast. You're going to be doing all the dishes. You're going to be doing all the cleaning. So you kind of have to earn your place in there, and bring dinner.
Nice.
Make sure it's probably steaks and potatoes.
Oh, that sounds good.
And make sure you can cook.
Oh, that's awesome. I've never even heard of it. So you actually designate somebody to do the cooking. So on our particular crew, there's kind of three of us that like to cook and are pretty good at it. So we kind of make the meal plans and do all the cooking and things like that. So our rookie kind of has a break in that aspect. That's good. So what is everybody? And let's break a little from the seriousness. But what is the vibe around the unit? What is it like on a day-to-day basis?
So in the morning, we all gather around the table. We have a common table that we're all going to sit at. We're going to drink coffee. We're going to, pardon the expletive, bust each other's balls a little bit. And so it's pretty laid back. I mean, you have to have really thick skin to survive here. Just dish it out just like you take it.
That's good. I mean, it's definitely one of those environments where you do have, like you said, you have to have the tough skin, because it's not to knock on anybody that doesn't have those qualities, but I mean, you are dealing with, it's a heavy workload what you guys have, aside from like the physical. I mean, you guys are dealing with some stuff that most people, like I myself, I know I would not be a good fit for this. But yeah, I mean, I could see where, you have to have that personality trait.
Absolutely. 'Cause we're going to run into things, that most people don't want to and probably shouldn't be seeing. And so, like, using humor, I think, is our way of kind of blowing off that steam. If we didn't, it would kind of all build up, and it's just not healthy.
Yeah. No, I can definitely understand. And I mean, I've been in a few instances where I've had to be the one to help, and I've frozen. I mean, it happened in my martial arts school. We had a broken ankle that kind of protruded out through the skin, and I saw that, and my knees got weak. And at that moment, I was like, I could not do that. I mean, everybody and the guys that came in, they were so cool about it. They kind of held. It was interesting, because I just, for me, it was one of those things where I was like, holy crap, I don't I don't really know what to do because I froze. People were like, call 911. And I was like, cell phone, where's that? I don't know. So I'm glad that you guys have that ability to kind of call on those whenever you need to, because like I said, most people could not do it. So I'm thankful that you guys are there for that. So let's kind of jump back, right? So now that you're in the, now you've made it in, and now you're kind of going through the process. What are some of the calls that you mentioned? Some of them was like 20% fire, and I think 80% was EMS related.
Mm-hmm.
So what are some of the common calls that you get?
So a lot of the calls are going to be accidents, trouble breathing, chest pain, things like that. We're called to a lot of sick calls, which could be really anything. You just have to, figure that out through a thorough patient assessment and, find out what's really going on there. A lot of it's, you'd be surprised. A lot of the calls kind of don't really call for an ambulance, but, we're just as professional with them as the ones that really, really need it.
So let's talk now about the person that's really interested in it. They say, they hear this podcast or they've gone through the process of doing the research, right? So what is something that you would say to them and say, hey, this is really something, an area that you should focus on? One of the things that are tough. What is something that you would say to that person?
Physical fitness, I think we hit that pretty hard. And then I think that would be probably the biggest one. Work on your physical fitness and your snappy comebacks.
That's good. What about the EMS side? Is there anything that's tough there? I mean, I'm sure you got to study a lot, but is there an area there that you would need a little more attention on? Is there anything there?
Cardiology is a big one, specifically for the paramedics that want to go through all that school. Cardiology will save you, and it'll bury you as well. But cardiology is probably at least my biggest hurdle. But if you get through that, you can probably get through most of it.
That's good. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that those calls are specifically, sensitive, because I'm sure, broken bones or something like that. You can, and again, I have no background on this, but I'm sure that you guys are well trained on how to handle those. But yeah, cardiology, I could imagine, is how to assess the patient, when to administer certain things and that kind of nature. I'm sure I'm sure that's a tough call for you guys, but I'm glad that you guys go through the training to get that done. So let's talk next a little bit about the kind of camaraderie that you guys share, right? So fire, EMS, police officers. You guys are a pretty tight knit group, right? So you guys kind of work hand in hand. So how much of that, how much do you guys kind of interact with each other?
All the time. Pretty much every call, we're working with both each other on the crew, and then usually the cops show up most of the time because they're bored or or it has something to do with them. So yeah, we work really closely. I know we get onto each other out in the public, but we're all part of the same team.
And do you guys do like any cross training? Do you guys kind of like, is there anything that you guys kind of piggyback off each other?
So there's a bit of a push now to train in active shooter type scenarios. So we train really closely with the police department on those type of incidents. They kind of have their role, and we kind of have ours, but we all need to be coordinated whenever one of these incidents happens. So we've been training really closely with them, and it's worked pretty well.
That's good. Wow, that's something I'm glad I asked that question, because it's unfortunately, it's something that you guys have to deal with now. And I mean, it's always been there, but now a little more prevalent, right? So it's good to hear that you guys are going through the cross-training process of, how to deal with the active shooter, what to do, those kind of things that unfortunately, in the society we live in, you have to be aware of. So what's something that, talking through it, what's something that you say it's most challenging now that you are actually in the force? What's something that you find that you kind of, it's still a struggle for you?
keeping current on our EMS type training. Things are changing all the time, and just keeping up with those changes is pretty daunting. It would take, most of my day to read articles and do CE hours and things like that to stay up on that type of thing. But we manage.
Right. And how often do you have to go through a recertification process, and how often?
So for paramedics in the state of Texas only, we have to do 144 hours of continuing education every 4 years. If you're nationally registered, then you have to do it every 2 years.
Okay. And what is the difference between being nationally registered versus just Texas?
So in order to initially obtain your Texas certification, you have to take what's called the National Registry Exam. And it's just kind of this really hard test that they put you through. But after that, you're considered nationally registered, and then you send that over to the state, and they will issue your state certification, your license to practice, I guess. Mm-hmm. And then if you want to keep your national, you have to do that process every 2 years. Or you can just drop it, and if you only plan to practice in Texas, or you don't plan on moving, then you just keep your Texas.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, that's good to know. So, what are some of the really cool things that you enjoy about your career?
I think you touched on it. The camaraderie is one of the aspects I really like coming to work. I really like coming to work with the people that I work with. They're a bunch of, they're really knowledgeable in what they do. They're a really fun group, and we get along really well. So that's probably the biggest thing. And then the job itself, it's always something different. Mm-hmm. Every day's never the same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, you guys get to see everything, and when you think you've seen everything, here's going to be something completely out of left field that you didn't account for. So that's good to know. That's good to hear. So as you were going through the process, what were some of the reactions of people around you when you let them know that, hey, I'm going to pursue this as a career?
A support. I had already been a volunteer for quite some time, so they knew that this was probably going to happen anyway. So they were like, well, what took you so long, basically? So as long as you get that support, I think you'll be fine.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, that's the key to everything, is that you make sure you have that support system kind of behind you. And then, so you mentioned the camaraderie around work. What are some of the people that you interact with that kind of move you, kind of push you a little bit? And what are some of the characters that kind of get you going?
So a good one is my officer, which is pretty much about the straightest laced person you can think of. Mm-hmm. He basically knows everything there is to know. It just seems that he knows basically everything there is to know about firefighting and things like that. Mm-hmm. And just seeing him, and if you do something well, and he's just gives you one of those looks, like, yeah, that'll push you even further up. That'll do more for you than an article in a newspaper or something like that.
Right. Yeah, so it's one of those things also, like, you guys, and again, I didn't thank you at the beginning of the episode, but thank you for your service, because, I mean, you guys definitely have a very important role. And unfortunately, you guys don't get thanked enough. I mean, unfortunately, that's the case, but, does that do something for you when people come up to you and shake your hand, and you kind of, what... I mean, I'm sure it kind of does, and unfortunately, it doesn't happen enough. So again, like I said, thank you for everything that you guys do, and your unit as well. Thank you guys, all of you guys out there that are listening. So what are some of the challenges that you see going forward for anybody that's kind of coming up for the trying to get into EMT or as a firefighter? Is there anything new that they should be aware of that might be coming up?
An increased emphasis on CPR, kind of not going, I guess, balls to the wall on CPR. There's new airway devices coming out that you're going to have to learn, but it's all just jargon, things like that. There's no real techniques, I guess, but no.
Yeah, so it's just staying current and up to date on some of the response, because I was and I haven't renewed my my certificate, but I was like CPR and first aid certified, and one of the things I noticed is we had to do, I think it's every 2 years, and it was just every time I would go it was a different technique. Like you mentioned, I think it was like start off it was like 10 compressions or whatever it was, and then it came, it was like going down, and then it was eventually like no compress or whatever it was, and yeah, it just changes so much. I can't imagine like trying to keep up with that and staying current and how to make the right choice, right? So I'm glad that you guys take that on and not me, because it was fresh. I'm like, last time I came here you told me it was too. But that's good to hear. So another thing I wanted to touch on, and it's kind of one of those interesting places that unfortunately you get to, is you get like the personalities that don't jive well, right? So you get somebody that made it through, and they're working alongside you. How do you deal with those kind of people?
So I do have some experience in this. So in those times, you just try to do the best you can with that person. If they're just completely unwilling to work or to learn or just to interact with anybody, then that person they'll eventually move themselves along, because they'll see everybody else interacting and having fun. They're not included, so they'll kind of weed themselves out. And if we see that coming, then we can kind of nip that in the bud as well.
Right. And do you guys go through a process of like every year, kind of like an assessment of sorts? Do you guys go through that at all?
Yeah. So we have annual self reviews, and so we'll basically just, hey, we did this. This was good. I did this crappy. And those will all be sent to HR, and our pay rates, are tied to that sort of thing. But yeah, we'll do that every year.
That's good. Yeah, so it kind of lets you know what are some of the things that you're doing really good on, and some of the things that you have to improve on. So talking through your career personally, what's something that you've seen like you've grown the most on? What's something that you like when you started, you're like, okay, I wasn't as proficient as that, but now that I feel like I'm really good at whatever that is.
EMS.
EMS.
Absolutely. EMS it's really, really scary in the beginning, and if you don't have a really good foundation, like you said, with your EMT basic and intermediate and things like that, then it's going to take you a while to get your feet under you. So I think after so many years now, kind of like you said, seen it all. I haven't seen it all, but I've seen a lot.
Right.
So remaining calm, knowing what to do in those situations, it's I think that's the biggest area that I've personally grown.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. But let's say the first time you went out to a call, what are some of the emotions that you were going through that you can kind of relate?
Oh man, heart was going 1,000 beats a minute. Just happy to be involved, basically. Everything's new. Everything's kind of scary, but also kind of cool. And you feel like you're part of this elite team that only we get to do this type of stuff. So that was one of the cool aspects.
Nice. Yeah, I bet you guys. Yeah, it's got to be for everybody, because you go from just being a civilian to like you got people's lives in your hands. So I'm glad you share that with us. So what is something that you're looking forward to in the future with your career? What are your aspirations, right? So what's the next step? Because I don't know, what kind of like the next steps are. You've mentioned like Fireman 1, Fireman 2. What is for you? What is the next step in your career?
So after you've been a fireman for a while, then you can test for driver, and then be an officer, and then probably a battalion or a district chief, and then you can work your way up to all the way to fire chief. That's not something I aspire to do, but maybe I would probably stop at battalion chief if I ever got there.
Okay. And what is it that role consist of?
So that's basically you're still on shift, but you're the incident commander. Whenever you arrive, you're the one in the kind of the tiny SUV that runs along, and you're always the incident commander. You handle all the people on your shift, and be it disciplinary or otherwise, and then scheduling, things like that. But the cool part was you're always the one in charge. You're always the guy that knows what to do, and you're the guy that everybody looks to, if they don't know what to do.
Right. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I always wondered what the little SUV was like. I was like, what do they do? That's cool. So on your personal self, right? What are some of the things that you always have to be prepared for? Because I'm sure, this is outside of your work, right? So I'm sure that you still, even when you're off duty, you still have that mindset of like, I got to be prepared. What's something that you still like do on your day-to-day basis that kind of keeps you ready at all times?
Workout's the big one. Just looking at different buildings. Building construction plays a really big role in firefighting, and so just going around to each building, like, if this was on fire, what would I do? If this part was on fire, what would I do? Where would be my first actions? Where's the closest hydrant to my house? Where's the closest hydrant to my parents' house? Things like that.
Oh wow! So you're still kind of gauging the environment. That's interesting. And I know a lot of people, like police officers, kind of go through those steps, right? Like they walk into like a place and they're like spotting the exits and so very similar for you as well. That's interesting to hear. So kind of along the lines of that, you personally said, these are the things that I would do. What is a recommendation for somebody who's not in the fire department, just somebody like myself? What is something that I should be prepared for? Like say in my home here, what is something that you would recommend that I would fire?
One of those right there.
Yes.
In most of your rooms, make sure your smoke detectors work. Have a first aid kit, and whenever you do need to dial 911, try to keep as calm as you can.
Mm-hmm. That's good. That's good to hear. And then outside of that, so I kind of brought this on, and honestly, I've never used this thing. I'm looking at the instructions. I'm like, if something's on fire, I got to read. I'm going to freak out. But with fire, with fire, it's one of those things that's, it can happen to anybody at any time for different reasons, right? So for a person like myself, and I'm the prime example of this because I don't know how to use this thing. What is something that you would recommend, right? So let's say, for example, I've never used this thing. Do you just use it, or what are?
So typically with these, they're instructions, and they're pretty well laid out. You have the pin. You pull the pin, point it at the fire, and then sweep along. That's basically it. I mean,
right. That's good to hear. Yeah, because I bought this, and this has been in the house since we got the house, and luckily I've never had to use it. But it's one of those things where if I had to, unfortunately, I'd have to read. I'm glad you explained. It's a simple instruction, but if put in that kind of pressure,
right.
Even though the instructions are right there, I might even just glaze that over. So would you recommend people kind of take these on? And I'm not sure, are these one-time use, or how do these take?
Yeah, so that's going to be a one-time use.
One-time use?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So probably a good idea to get you a couple of those and maybe like try one out.
Yeah, you can practice.
Yeah.
You can practice exit drills if you have a family.
Yeah, that's important.
Also, testing your smoke detectors once a month, and then changing the batteries every 6 months. It's a big one.
Yeah, because it's fires, like they could start in the attic and your your fire alarm doesn't go off, and next thing you know, your whole house is on fire. So for you guys with going through the fire, speaking predominantly for the fire suppression side, when is your most active time? When do you guys seem to get the most calls?
During the day, typical business hours. Not a lot. Uh, there's not a lot going on at night for people to be lighting their houses on fire.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and Thanksgiving's probably our biggest day.
Oh, turkeys, I'm sure.
Yeah.
That's I kind of figured that one. So what's another thing that you would say for the person that's still listening to the podcast and then they go, okay, I'm really interested to this. What is something that you say, hey, this is why I personally joined, that you can give that to them as well?
So I kind of touched on it earlier. I just, caught the itch from making a call. To that person, I would say go and join your local volunteer department and see if it's for you. You really would get a feel whether it's for you at that point, because they're going to provide you with the training. They're going to expose you to all these things, and you don't really have to invest a whole bunch of money and time into this. Just to find out that maybe this wasn't for me. I don't really like this anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So before you go to the academy, go join up your local volunteers and have them run you through it a little bit.
That's good, and I'm glad you brought that up because, so as a volunteer fire, when you're getting into that spot, what are some of the things that you would be expected to do at that point? I mean,
just the same as anybody else.
Oh, really? Mm-hmm. So you're in the same, you're doing the same things, just you're volunteering. Mm-hmm. Oh, I thought it was a little different. So that's good to know. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you're actually doing the work that you'd be doing as a fire. Oh, that's awesome. So yeah, if anybody listening that's interested, that's good advice, good solid advice. I'm glad you were able to give that to us. So the next subject's a little bit touchy, right? Because when this airs, it's going to be September 11th, right? So, we were probably, I would say, sophomores or juniors when that occurred.
Junior,
yeah. Yeah, and I know a lot of the people that might want to be interested in, and they might have not been alive when this happened, right? So how did that not mold you, but what did that do for you trying to get into the academy or trying to become a fire pro?
So it always sticks with you. Like, I remember that at the exact classroom and the day that it happened, and I remember the sound of the after the collapse, the sound of the what's called pass devices going off. I didn't know it at the time. I didn't know what I was listening to, but after getting into it, I know exactly what that sound is and how ominous it was. But just making sure that every time I come to work, I do those guys justice.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's unfortunate that so many lives were lost. I mean, some of your brethren, firefighters and police officers, unfortunately lost their lives. And that's why I feel like like I mentioned, it was a thankless job. And unfortunately, like, we don't give you guys enough credit for the job that you guys do. So, as you're going through the paces of your day-to-day life, how much do you go in and you stay, because you potentially, and I don't want to say it like this because it's a little touchy, but it could be the last time that you come into work, right? You could go into a simple building and next thing you know, you're not there anymore. So how much of that do you carry with you when you begin work?
All the time. It always has to be in the back of your mind. Mm-hmm. There's plenty of classes that we take on self-rescue, and there's various things in place during each incident, just in case that does happen, because it could happen at any point. Mm-hmm. So you have to always be aware of your surroundings, be aware of where you are in buildings, and make sure it's not you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a rough place to be at because most of what you mentioned makes the job very sound appealing, but then it does have that drawback, and like you mentioned, you have to have that mental preparedness that it could happen to you, or it could happen to somebody that you really care about in the academy. So kind of on the same leaf, what is something that you've experienced that have you ever had to like pull one of your teammates out or kind of save them at this point?
So no, it doesn't happen a whole lot. Mm-hmm. I have gotten lost in a structure, mm-hmm. and when you're going through training, you're like, oh, how does that happen? Mm-hmm. But once you do in a real incident, it is very scary feeling, and you just have to revert back to your training and try and get out.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, because I'm sure the smoke and especially if you've never been in that building or structure before, it's got to be disorienting because you're trying to do your job at the same time. You're like, oh, did I make a left or right? How the hell do I get out? That's interesting. So one more thing I want to touch on because we're kind of coming up to the end of the show here is we talked about kind of your aspirations for the future, right? What is something that you've seen a positive change when it comes to like firefighting and EMS? Is there something that you've noticed that like you've seen an improvement? Maybe it's technology, maybe it's like in the way that things are run, or do you see anything positive that you've seen?
Lately, there's a big push on back injuries because we lift stretchers all the time. And so in our ambulances, there's a stretcher. It's what we call an auto load. So we can push the stretcher with the patient up to the ambulance and press a button, and it lifts the stretcher up and puts it in there for us. And before that was we had to have 4 and 5 guys on the stretcher to get them in there sometimes, and it was just really bad. It hurt your back. You come back with back pain, and it's just terrible. That's my favorite thing.
That's good. So I wanted to ask you kind of some fun questions to close out the show. All right. So on your downtime as you're in the unit, all right, what are you doing right now? Let's say you're just sitting around. There's nothing going on. What are you doing?
Sleeping.
Sleeping.
No. Either I'm sitting in the recliner, or if I've gotten my training done for the day, I'm prepping dinner or cooking it. But a lot of time is spent in the recliner.
Nice. And is it a massaging recliner?
No, unfortunately.
No? Oh, we got to get you guys one of those. Those are nice.
Talk to the city council.
We'll have to do that for you. All right. So what about Netflix? What are you watching?
Just watched the Chappelle special.
Oh, yeah.
That was a really good one. I thought that was hilarious.
I haven't seen that one. I need to catch up on that. All right. What about series-wise? Anything series that you're watching?
Parks and Rec.
Parks and Rec.
Again.
How many times have you seen it?
This is third
time. That's a good show. All right. What about music? What do you listen to?
Right now, what I was jamming on the way up here, Parkway Drive.
Nice. All right. And favorite food?
Ooh, Indian.
Indian food? Really? Oh, wow. Curry?
So I'm torn between lamb tikka masala and biryani.
Biryani, yeah, the chicken biryani is really good. I like my favorite is a chicken tikka masala. We have a huge Indian crew over there where I work, and man, they bring some delicious food. They get samosas, and man, we go eat Indian maybe once a month. It's delicious. That's awesome. I want to thank you out for coming out. Again, thank you for your service. Thank you for all the work that you guys do. Just not just yourself, but anybody out there that's listening. We really appreciate all the things that you guys do for us and keeping us safe. So thank you for coming out.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right, no problem. All right, well, thanks, everybody. That wraps up this episode, and thank you for listening. All right, we're out. Cool. All right, dude. Hey, everyone. Hope you enjoyed today's show. I just wanted to take some time to thank my guest, Chris Moon, for stopping by and giving us some valuable information. All right, I'd also like to thank everybody out there, all the men and women who are firefighters, EMS, police officers, all of you guys in the armed forces. Thank you so much for everything you do. Your work is really, really, really important, and we appreciate it. All right, well, thanks for checking us out. Till the next one. Bye.